Welcome to the Provocateurs podcast, enabling you to think differently about leadership.
Hello, I'm Stuart Craner, co-founder of Thinkers 50. Welcome to the Provocateurs podcast. It's a very special edition recorded at Thinkers 50 event at the Guildhall in London. Provocateurs is a podcast which encourages you to think and feel differently after our conversations with some fantastic people. It's a collaboration between Thinkers 50 and Deloitte. So today I'm joined by Jeff Tuff. Jeff leads Deloitte's sustainability work globally in the energy and industrial sectors. And with Steve Goldbach is the co-author of a succession of fantastic books. Is it okay to say the word fantastic?
I think you can say fantastic anytime you want about our books.
The books Detonate, Provoke, and most recently, Hone. Jeff, as ever, great to see you. Perhaps you could introduce our brilliant guest today.
Absolutely, nice to see you as well. It's nice to actually be able to do one of these in person. So our guest today is Natalie Nixon. Natalie is one of those people whose resume is absolutely jam-packed with interest and surprises, if you don't mind my saying that. Amongst other things, she worked in global apparel sourcing in Sri Lanka and Portugal, earned a PhD in design management while working full-time, leading executive education programs, and spent 16 years as a professor at Thomas Jefferson University. Along the way, she lived and worked across 5 countries, shaping her global perspective and sharpening her approach to helping teams adapt, innovate, and thrive in ambiguity. She is also a dancer, an open water swimmer, and much more. She is a member of the Thinkers 50 Radar and has been shortlisted for their Talent Award. Natalie is the award-winning author of The Creativity Leap and her latest book, Move, Think, Rest, That was published in September of 2025. On top of that, she and I recently had the pleasure of sharing our ideas together on a panel at Harvard Business School, and I've come to know that she is a fantastic conversationalist and will, I'm sure, have a very entertaining conversation today. So Natalie, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Stuart. It's great to be here.
So we have a lot to talk about. I don't know if we start with open water swimming or dancing, but we should probably stick to your books. But how do you actually make sense of your career? Is there some sort of through line to the entire thing that actually does make it make sense?
Well, one could argue that the open water swimming and the dancing are all relevant. I'm a big fan of saying we need to be a clumsy student of something in our lives. We're not the smartest person in the room because it transfers over to our work. It certainly has in my case. I would say that the through line in my very diverse / loopy career is my willingness to commit to following my intuition, to following my heart. And I got the permission slip to do that as a sophomore in college. I called home a bit nervous because I would have to declare a major in another 3 weeks, and I wanted to impress my parents after they invested a lot in a very expensive education. Talked around the issue of really loving cultural anthropology and Africana studies. And finally, they said almost at the same time, this is in the 80s when my dad was on the phone in the kitchen, my mom was on the phone in the bedroom. And they said, well, what are you enjoying? And I confessed that I loved these courses in cultural anthropology, these multidisciplinary courses. And almost at the same time, they said, that's what you should do. And my dad said, Natalie, if you study what you love, you have to turn away opportunities because no one will have to tell you to wake up earlier, stay later, work a lot longer. And probably, it was this big load lifted off my shoulders when they gave me that permission. And I have followed that advice, probably to their chagrin at different points. But I really believe it's a much more efficient way to live. I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm solidly middle-aged, and so I do experience friends and colleagues who have these kind of wake-up moments at this stage in their lives where they are wondering what's it all mean, what's it all adding up to. So whether it was my entrepreneurial venture as a hat designer, the 5 years I spent being a middle school English teacher, which was inarguably the best experience I've had that set me up for everything I've gone on to do, being a middle school English teacher. Working in global fashion sourcing and living and working abroad for a division of the limited brands in Sri Lanka, Portugal, as you mentioned. And then deciding I was tired of being in different time zones from friends and family, and through a series of introductions became a professor. The through line up to this point of being entrepreneurial and being CEO of Figure 8 Thinking has been to follow that nudge, which is a commitment to figure it out, to ask for help, to take inventory of both earned skills and experiences and lived experience, and to commit to dreaming and figuring out how to make that real. So what's really cool is that now my work as a creativity strategist, everything I've done has converged to help me to do the work of helping companies and leaders connect the dots between creativity and business results so that they can sustainably innovate.
That's great.
With all these experiences, you should be 110 years old.
I was about to say, how do you actually?
Well,
somehow
it was the 5 years
we
as a
missed some of
teacher,
the
we
stuff
missed
in
Well,
the
committed to
bio.
Linda's 100-year. That's great.
You talk about democratizing creativity.
Yes.
Can you talk about that, what you mean by that, and how important that is to?
Yeah, well, in the early years of building my business, I would get invited into companies to help them build cultures of innovation. And sometimes that became some innovation theater, it became a little copy paste. It was just trying to keep up with the Joneses. And it was all often a very siloed approach. And I suspected that we were going about it in the wrong way, that we actually needed to start with creativity. The challenge was, I realized that if I said to a lot of these leaders in Fortune 500 companies, hey guys, we need to be starting with creativity in order to build a culture of innovation, they would look at me like I had three heads, because most people, a lot of people, when they hear the word creative or creativity, they think of art only. So they're thinking of a paintbrush or a dance studio or music. And it turns out artists are exceptional at wrestling with the ambiguity of the creative process. But I instinctively realized that the best engineers, the best scientists, CFOs, attorneys, coders, executive assistants, plumbers are super creative. I just need to figure out a way to explain that in a simple, accessible way. So when I talk about democratizing creativity, it's really to provide an accessible on-ramp for all of us to access creativity as a strategic competency. Because to be human means that it's part of our birthright to be creative. It kind of gets drummed out of us by, I used to say high school, but more and more people are even saying middle school. So that began my work and process of doing, in my nerdy way, kind of miniature ethnographies to figure out how to build evidence of this more accessible way to think about creativity beyond art. And I landed on the wonder-rigor theory, that creativity is our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems and deliver novel value. And as I share that more and more broadly, first through the creativity leap, and the Move, Think, Rest book is another way to think about that. It really resonates with people, because it's this relief that something that they suspect is very innate to them is possible to exercise, it's possible to access, and it's possible to build in a very strategic way.
So the juxtaposition of wonder and rigor, I think, is fascinating. A lot of leaders think about creativity as roughly equal to innovation, which means moving fast, breaking things, but we know that you believe in moving fast and fixing things. So two-part question here. First of all, tell us a little bit about wonder and how that plays into leadership qualities and the importance of that. And then secondly, how do you combine wonder with rigor so that at the end of the day you're ending up with something that is fixed and not lying in pieces all over the floor?
Well, wonder is something that makes sense for people when I think about creativity, because for the most part, people still are thinking about creativity as like kind of doing whatever you feel like. It's a bit whimsical. The more I researched wonder, the more I learned how some really smart people throughout history have given it a lot of credence. I think about wonder as deep curiosity, as audacity, as dreaming and daydreaming, and the ability to pause, because it's really hard to wonder when you're moving too quickly. And so Socrates said that wonder is the beginning of wisdom. Centuries later, the Jewish theologian and civil rights activist Abraham Heschel wrote that it's wonder, not doubt, which is the root of all knowledge. So if you want to become wiser and more knowledgeable, we actually need to design space and time for wonder, which does require us to slow down a bit. And it does require us to mix up how we work, where we work, with whom we work, And it also allows us to tap into what I call inside out work. And I think in the future, work will increasingly become more inside out, meaning that the best leaders will be a bit more personable, will want to create environments where people can, or we're curious about people's personal lives and how that adds value to the work. But it's actually the rigor dimension.
But before you
yeah.
move on to the rigor, can I just ask you though, because
Yeah.
I'm sure some of our listeners will want to know, how is wonder different from curiosity then? Because I think I'm hearing something different and that goes beyond simply being curious about the world around you.
Well, I think about curiosity as being a component of wonder. I really think of wonder as being this more overarching umbrella where we can plug in the curiosity, the awe, the audacity. Ian Leslie's written a really great book called Curious, and he defines curiosity as I just forgot how he says it. It's a gap in information. So I used to think curiosity is the absence of information, but it's needing to know. You need to know just a little bit about something to be curious. So I think about curiosity as kind of a wayfinding mechanism that we as humans, as humankind, have always had to make sense of the world. In human development, it's how babies and toddlers and little people figure things out. So it's a component of wonder in the way that I think about wonder.
Yeah.
I think the idea of ambiguity is really interesting as well,
Yes.
which you talked about as creative people are comfortable with ambiguity. But if you talk to senior leaders, often ambiguity is a really big issue for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they don't quite know what they should be doing often.
Yeah. But liminal space is actually what all of this technology and AI, I know I'm jumping the gun, we're going to get into AI more, but liminal space is actually what we're being gifted with AI and automation and robotics. Because we can get the answer so much more quickly, the so what behind all of that is to figure out, to sit in that liminal space, to sit in that what's next. And most of us, when we reflect back on our lives and our work, we realize that our biggest achievements happen when we were on that verge of figuring out what's next, when we're faced with that crossroads of what's next. So instead of struggling and working against the liminal space and the ambiguity, it's actually an opportunity to sit still, to ask for help, to revisit, to reframe. And unfortunately, as a former educator, we educate in a way that errs on the side of what is the answer, fill in the dot. I need the answer yesterday. And that's what we have rewarded our leaders for. In reality, there's so much gray that they have to navigate. So falling in love with the process is really the mindset and the activity that, in my opinion, we need to incentivize, we need to reward, and we need to hire for, so that we can better navigate the reality of work.
So I feel like we left the the juxtaposition of wonder and rigor hanging a little bit. Tell us about the rigor component and how that then ties into what you were just describing with liminal spaces.
Yeah, so the rigor is the part that we typically forsake when we think about creativity. And I referenced that I did this miniature ethnography to figure out a way to make creativity more accessible.
What have you discovered about Stuart and me in your miniature ethnography?
Well, you both favor navy suits, and navy jackets, and blue shirts. No, but the ability just to have this conversation and to kind of riff is really critical. But rigor is the dimension of creativity that we underestimate. So rigor is about focus, it's about discipline, it's about skill mastery, technique, time on task, and all creative endeavors require the rigor. So when I was doing this miniature ethnography, I was looking at the way chefs, dancer choreographers, first responders, all work in the moment. And it turns out that you must know the rules in order to bend them, extend them, sometimes break them. But it's, when you're figuring things out, as I was doing this consulting work of helping these companies and teams build cultures of innovation, I didn't really understand how to explain it to them. So this was a very loopy process. It was a very iterative process. Doing this ethnography helped me, and it was when I was observing a rehearsal of Ballet X, which is a resident modern ballet company in Philadelphia, in a rehearsal. That's when it all clicked for me. But in the rehearsal, you really see the rigor, you see the repetition, you see the fastidiousness to the detail. It was retrospectively that I was like, well, of course I landed on this wonder-rigor paradigm, because the root of how I began to get into this work of being a creativity strategist was working on a PhD in the field of design management. I was working with the Ritz-Carlton Hotel to understand the ways that they design experiences that don't just help us and make us feel good, but delight us and exceed our expectations. And the theoretical construct I used was jazz improvisation as a heuristic. And it turns out that jazz and all improvisational systems are chaordic systems. And so a chaord is a word that Dee Hock, the founder of Visa, made up. It's a mashup of chaos and order. And it stems from chaos theory and complex systems thinking. So of course, that was kind of embedded in my brain from way back when, but I wasn't conscientious of it as I was fumbling through the dark, figuring out how to. It's not just wonder that makes us creative and that makes processes creative. So the wonder-rigor is another example of this chaordic system of the wonder is the chaos, and chaos is not anarchy. Chaos is randomness, and order is not control. Order is structure. And once you learn about chaordic systems, it's the thing that can not be unseen. You see chaotic systems everywhere. And it's so the wonder and the rigor are really important, and it's really important to toggle between them, because if you spend too much time with your head in the clouds, you won't ever get traction. And if you spend too much time in the weeds, you'll burn out.
Can everyone do that though? Toggle between the two?
Yes.
'Cause it seems like there are some people I know who have their head in the clouds all the time, and there's some people I know who are very orderly and very focused on getting things done. But
Well, it's naming the challenge, right? It's naming the opportunity. I could spend all day in wonder, right?
Yeah.
and I have to do more work to commit to the rigor, to what are the constraints, what do I need to learn, what are the guidelines, but what I have learned and discovered, the more I commit to that in my personal life and my professional practice, is this corollary. The wonder is found in the midst of rigor, and rigor can't be sustained without wonder. They're copacetic. So you actually will bump into one, as if you're conscientious of it, as you're delving into the rigor, as you're delving into the wonder.
As you talk about wonder and creativity, when you talk to senior leaders, is their reaction to it changed over time?
So I actually used to prototype and tiptoe into the conversation. Typically, at the end of a session, I'd be in conversation with a leader. This is before I was really rolling out this idea. And I would say, well, there is this other approach that I've been using with some other clients where we're really leaning into wonder. And I would just because I was really nervous about talking about this woo-woo word wonder in a corporate environment. And I would notice that their body language would soften. They kind of like lean into the table. They'd want to understand more. So they are delighted to have a construct that doesn't forsake the structure, the protocol, the need to have the regulations, but also the evidence showing that you actually will not be able to consistently and sustainably innovate if you don't dive into the wonder. The other thing is a lot of organizations are conflating rigidity for rigor. They're actually not being rigorous. They're not actually curious about the rules and the focus and the discipline. They're actually even not making time for the discipline of the practice. And the difference, the way I distinguish rigidity from rigor is that rigidity is not adaptive. Rigor is adaptive. Rigidity says, we said we were going to do this and go this way. Although alarm bells are ringing and red flags everywhere, we're still going to do this, right? So that kind of saving face of cultures where it's hard to admit failure or use failure as learning, then that's where rigidity is kind of the go-to instead of rigor.
So what happens as we get more I shouldn't say dominated by machines, but as our work environment becomes more dominated by machines, you started talking about AI before. I would say it's probably easy to imagine that the more technology we have in place, the more rigid we become, simply because computers operate by rules, and ultimately you don't have that human element of wonder being injected into the system to create the rigor that you're talking about. Tell us a little bit about how you think about tech and its impact on the ability to balance with wonder with rigor.
Yeah, well, we don't necessarily have to become more rigid. If we play our cards right, then the technology really can be an added value co-pilot, co-creator, co-instigator. So I was thinking this morning, I took the bus into Guildhall. It's like a 15, 17 minute bus ride. I get off the bus, I'm daydreaming, as I'm wont to do, looking out the window, busy, hustling, bustling London streets, and just like the sea of people walking back and forth as I'm walking to Guildhall. And even Guildhall, like historically, was this place where these guilds and more contemporary language unions would meet. So I was just observing that work as we know it, organizations as they've been currently designed, are literally changing underneath our feet. The only reason why we have this hustle and bustle, the reason why we have these cities, is that pre-industrial revolution, we woke up in the morning, did our ablutions, had some food, walked over the threshold, and we were at work. And with the advent of a different type of machine, it shifted transportation, it shifted family structure, it shifted ranking order of, the priest was no longer as powerful, and all those sorts of things. And the reason why we have this hustle and bustle in the morning, the reason I'm on the bus, and the reason why London has emerged as it has, is because of a disruptive system around the first industrial revolution that said and provoked people to think differently about work. And people learned new rules, they became adaptive, things did change. And I think similarly now, the opportunity is to use the AI as our collaborator. I was thinking in preparation of this, of a few examples. So, a kind of an obvious go-to places in design and technology. So a company like Pixar, you have design teams that are using AI to help with iteration cycles, to help with storyboarding. But the key is to plug and play, is to understand that that the AI, the technology, is a starting point, and then to go analog, and then to go back in. Again, that's a very improvisational way of working. We might feel more comfortable to design work as a beautiful classical music orchestra where all the bows are up at the same time, but that's actually not quite realistic. Another example is in healthcare. So there are all these interesting reports and studies of how radiologists have used AI to help model different ways to interpret what they're seeing in the body. The Mayo Clinic, which is experimental in the United States, has experimented for a long time with service design, and they're using artificial intelligence as well for a more iterative process. So I think that if we shift away from the what the AI is doing, just the result, and don't stop there, but get more engaged in the how, and get more engaged in a more improvisational riffing process, that's where we can have not such a dystopian ending, but a better ending.
So the cool thing that I think I hear you saying, tell me if I've got this wrong, and it may actually sound somewhat strange to some of our listeners, is AI can actually be more humanizing by allowing that liminal space and allowing you the ability to actually delve into wonder more than you might have otherwise.
Absolutely. It can be. A lot of time when we have these conversations about the future of work, how organizations are designed, we are, and it's understandable, we're only thinking about ourselves. And by us, I mean Gen Xers, geriatric millennials, boomers. We have to really also factor in Gen Z, the alpha generation, which, I know Gen Z, our daughter's 24, and, this is a generation that's kind of looking at us like, how's that all worked out for you guys? And why are you working? And why are you continuing to work in this way? And I think if we look at the labor supply, when we think about future of work, we have to be more curious about the ways that they want to learn, that they want to work, more distributed work, So when I reference that the organization, and organizations are organisms, we try to make them machine-like, but that's where we get frustrated because we forget that they are imperfect, they are inconsistent, they're not predictive because they are organisms. There's these opportunities with Gen Z and the Alpha generation to have more distributed work, to have more ecosystems of work. I think it was Linda. So the opportunity, again, if we're conscientious, if we're curious about who's coming up behind us, if we pause to even ask ourselves, how is this working out for us? The World Economic Forum has set creativity as one of the top 10 skills for, now it's 2025, but back in 2016, they said it would be, 2015, they said it's going to be the number 10 skill by 2020. 2016, they said it's going to be the number 3 skill. In 2023, the Future Job Skills Report, they ranked creativity as the number 2 job skill. And number 1 is critical thinking. So there's that. And then we have all this other data and research. I think Thrive My Way research has said that 72% of business leaders around the world look at creativity as essential for market competitiveness. So we have these storied organizations and incredible business leaders saying, yes, creativity really matters as a business ROI. And yet 75% of employees report that they don't have the opportunity to build creativity as a capacity throughout the year. So there's this gap analysis between, yes, it matters, and where are we designing space and time to do that? So dealing with those of us who are in the workforce and readying us to build creativity as this capacity, looking at younger people, the ways that they are masters of using this technology, and the fact that they are chronically overwhelmed, underconnected. I think according to a study by Wiley, like 46% have an official psychological diagnosis related to anxiety. Wow. So this is what we have to factor in as we're designing work and designing organizations. And I'm biased, but it's my view that creativity as capacity building, not just as individuals, but as teams and as organizations, is really the way to go. And as you've pointed out, as you've reflected back for me, the AI and the technology is actually giving us an opportunity because it's so quick, of this liminal space that we now have to do more collaboration, more eyeball to eyeball conversations, and to pause.
Tell us about your new book, Move, Think, Rest, which reflects many of the issues you've been talking about, but at its core is the notion of productivity.
Yeah.
What is productivity? Because it's one of those things that people kind of understand as a concept.
Right.
And yet misunderstand in so many ways. Yeah,
what is productivity? Thank you for asking about the new book, but what is productivity? Why do we work? In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's clothing, food, shelter. If we're lucky, we get to embed meaning and purpose into our work as well. But when I really dove into our ways we think about productivity, it's a relic of the first industrial revolution. It's a relic of looking at work that's based on speed, output. You measure only what you can see.
It's Frederick Taylor.
Frederick Winslow Taylor, exactly. And that had its place in time. And the reality is that two of the biggest components that drive our work today, search engines and emails, are not factored into gross domestic product. At least in the United States, they're not, right? So what I was really curious about was, number one, observing that when I was procrastinating, when I would step away from the desk and then return, my ideas were clearer, sharper, something that stymied me, it started to gel. So it was just a personal reflection. In my work, I was observing people dying a slow death at work, and my desire to making sure that creativity is really seen as this business ROI, and landing on a both and model. So if the ways we've thought about productivity are either or, the both and model that I'm offering is one of cultivation. So instead of asking, how might I be more productive this week? How might my team be more productive this quarter? A different question is, what might I cultivate this week? What might my team cultivate? And the difference is that when we're looking at cultivation in a 21st century way, we value the solo practitioner and the collective. and we can do both. We value quick spurts of growth because we can work quickly, but we also value slow and understand, as the Navy SEALs say, that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And we also value measuring what we can see, that matters, but also accept that when things are percolating, we need to sleep on it, that's also a modality of work. So in Move, Think, Rest, what I do is offer a human-centered operating system to help people tap into this both-and model as individuals, as teams, and as organizations.
Do you ever chill out and do absolutely nothing, where it's not actually work, you're doing nothing?
Yeah.
And I ask that seriously, but you are
know.
very impressive at all that you do. But in this theory, is there ever time to actually just completely unplug and not be thinking or being productive? And
well, I mean, my company is called Figure Eight Thinking, so that's kind of by default. But
and we need to hear more about that as well. So please tell us about that and tell us why it's called Figure Eight Thinking.
Well, no, I mean, that whole inside out work is something that I've committed to in my own life. So just in a single day, I take daydream breaks. I was a mighty daydreamer as a 6-year-old, and I've stuck to it. You know, my report cards would say Natalie's doing fine, but she tends to daydream a bit too much. You know, but you know, I'll take it's a 90-second daydream break. I'll stand by a window. It just revives me. So in micro breaks throughout the day. We reference that I'm a lifelong dancer. I play. I observe in my life and in myself that when I get out of my head and into my body, there's joy, there is serendipity, there is relaxation, there's de-stressing, and I look forward to going back to my work in different ways. I also learn all these constant life lessons. So I've been studying ballroom dance now consistently for the past 5 years, and there's so much about, for example, as a woman, typically you're the follower. My husband would probably agree. I'm not always the best follower. One of the reasons I've been really engaged in our marriage. I love my husband, but also just because it's helping me to be not always leading, but following. And following is a really important leadership principle, because as I've learned in ballroom dance, when you follow, you must actively listen. You must pause and wait. You must be attuned. You must be intuitive. And it's a muscle that I'm developing. I am a clumsy student of open water swimming. I didn't grow up as a competitive swimmer. I've gotten to be a stronger swimmer over the decades. And on an invitation from a friend, decided to go on a swimming holiday that a British company called Swim Trek organizes around the world. And it was life-changing. And I'm not the fastest person, but it gets me. And that's not the point. The point is to work on my relationship with the water. It's about hiking through the water. It is about getting out of my head and into my body. I know that I do my best work in the morning. So because I work from home, I'm an entrepreneur, I have the privilege to kind of design my days. And I typically like to clock off by 2 or 3 and get up really early, because that's where my mind is sharpest. So those are the ways that I pause, that I play. And play is a really important component of the Move, Think, Rest system. It's not just about having a ping pong table or a dartboard in the office, but it's when we play, we are engaged. I learned that from Brendan Boyle, he teaches a course on play at Stanford D School. And I went out to his class, observed it, interviewed Brendan later. He's a toy designer. And we really had an engaging conversation about how do we get more executives to design play so that they have more engaged employees. Play, when we were at play, we were collaborating, we were actively listening, we're asking questions, we're more empathetic, we're negotiating, all the skills that we say we want in leaders and in teams.
It feels very liberating.
It is.
So what next, Natalie? What are you working on next?
Well, I'm taking a breath after having just written and gotten published Move, Think, Rest. A big interest for me is to make my content more accessible by digitizing it, and using the tools of technology to have my portfolio of work accessible to a wide range of people in different modalities and bits and ways. I love my keynote speaking, and that's a way that I can get immediate feedback on ideas. It's the way that I prototype ideas often. But one of the first ways I'm experimenting with that is offering courses. So launching some companion courses to the Creativity Leap and to Move, Think, Rest. And so on the one hand, digitizing my IP, but also I'm getting some inspiration of having some more curated, not quite retreats, but curated events that are kind of these wonder-rigor conversations. So
sounds like no chilling out.
No, well, to me, that's fun.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, Jeff will sign up for a dance retreat.
That would be cute. Yeah.
Good.
Natalie, we're out of time. Natalie's book, Move, Think, Rest, is available now. And if your website, Natalie?
Thank you. Figure8thinking.com, the number 8.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
This podcast is part of an ongoing series of interviews with executives. The executives' participation in this podcast are solely for educational purposes based on their knowledge of the subject, and the views expressed by them are solely their own. Podcasts should not be deemed or construed to be for the purpose of soliciting business for any of the companies mentioned, nor does Deloitte advocate or endorse the services or products provided by these companies.